Okay, that was the fun part, and I imagine that's why most of you watch my program, is because I also shoot. But today I'm going to do a little talking, because after the fun part of actual shooting, believe it or not, your evaluation process is not just getting started, but now you need to do the completion, which is to analyze everything in terms of the target, in terms of your analytical numbers, your cases, everything. So stick around, folks. Now we're going to go through that final process with you in just a moment. Hang on. Okay, now the unspoken truth. Never, ever go by the numbers that you see on the internet, including my own. Never try to mirror what somebody else is doing, because your rifle is unique, and it is your responsibility to go ahead and to test properly, safely, efficiently, cautiously, and effectively, so that you can have the best outcome. Now, the best way to do that is to go by the bullet manufacturers' published data in their manuals. They've got millions of dollars worth of equipment and hundreds of hours of testing, so that you will have a safe and reliable product that you will use, can be effective, and then brag about. So come back in a little bit and let's go through the after the shot, what the process is for further evaluation. See you in a moment. This applies to both commercial ammunition that you buy over the counter, or for us hand loaders especially, without the use of a chronograph. But excessive velocity. If the velocity on the box or in your ammunition reloading manual says it should be X based upon that load, and you have higher velocity or even lower velocity than what's listed on there, then that's an inconsistency that can contribute to pressure in both your chamber, your barrel, and definitely the case of the cartridge. Okay, now with the chronograph, again, a chronograph never lies. It only gives you numbers. But you can gauge a little bit better as far as shot to shot for your ammunition by what's called extreme spread, which is the difference between the first shot and the last shot, or the highest and the lowest shot. The standard deviation, which is an average of all three in terms of velocity. Now, if those are wide apart, you don't necessarily have the best ammunition or the most consistent ammunition for your firearm. Okay, so this also has to do probably with the amount of powder that is in there. You might have seen one of my previous videos where I shot some factory ammunition and got 300 feet per second lower than was listed on the box. I contacted the company, they sent me a new box, and this one was dead on with what it should have been. So your powder choice and your load density for reloaders also has a direct influence on that standard deviation, extreme spread, and velocity differences. All right, now here's where the work really starts. After the fun of the shooting, after you've evaluated all of those numbers that the chronograph gave you, and you've evaluated the target to find out if it was human error or was it directly related to the ammunition that you were shooting, now comes case inspection. A lot of people leave this out, especially you folks that just buy commercial ammunition. You probably just discard your cases and don't pay any attention to it. I encourage you to pick up those cases and inspect them, because it is a direct mirror image of what's going on inside your chamber of your rifle. All right, so let's go ahead through that, an understanding of brass. Okay, the reason armament companies and military and even commercial manufacturers use brass is because it's soft. both expands and contracts. Now, under a heck of a lot of pressure, you can imagine the expansion that would have on that case. It would just blow apart at 60,000 psi. That's pounds per square inch. But your chamber is a certain size and it holds that brass together. Now that sounds a little too easy for a lot of people to understand. That gets back to the excessive bolt lift. That gets back to chambering properly, smoothly, because that brass should be started at SAAMI specifications before you even shoot. But now after you shot, obviously that case changes. It changes to the dimensions of your chamber. It expands, it contracts so that you can quickly extract that cartridge. But now the inspection process happens. All right, so let's look at the case from back to front. Okay, so the most obvious signs that most people know about is the primer and the case head. If there is excessive pressure, it generally will show up on the primer and the disfiguration of the primer or lack of disfiguration. A primer is rounded. If you look at it before you put it in, it's rounded and it's got kind of a recess from where it sits into the primer pocket. Now, after that firing pin hits and after that detonates, if there's excessive pressure, pressure can go both not only down the barrel but back toward the breech of the firearm. And if there's more pressure to sort of push out that primer, it will disform. It will become flattened, or it will what's called cratering, where the indent of the pin, the firing pin hits that, it will kind of leave a little crater around that indentation, or it will flatten completely, which means the primer worked its way out, but because of the breech face of your bolt, it then pushed it back in and flattened it against the case. These are all signs of overpressure. Yes, it does happen with commercial ammunition as well. Okay, the next thing, and only hand loaders pretty much know this, is a loose primer pocket. Now once a primer is loose, that means the case head has deformed, or the primer pocket has deformed, and that case should be discarded because there's no longer a tight fist to seal the gases from inside of that case once it's fired. Now that gas can escape back through toward the breech, which is where your face is, by the way. So the only way to check that is to go ahead and use a go, no-go gauge, or when you're doing the reloading process, if you hand seat the primers, whether or not it goes in a little too easily, or you can use simply just a spent primer or another primer, turn it over, put the case head on it. If you're pushing down and the primer doesn't seat, then you know that the primer pocket is good. But what a lot of people don't know about is the next part, because almost nobody checks it, because you need a special micrometer for this. And just in front of the rim of the case, to where the body of the case starts, is called the case web. That is the thickest and heaviest part of the case. But just in front of that is where you need a micrometer to measure to find out if there's excessive expansion there, even after resizing, because in some cases your resizing die will not go all the way down and touch your shell holder when you're resizing, especially with Magnum belted cases. It's going to stop at the belt. But if you cam down on that case and you hit a spot and there's going to leave a mark or a ring right there, that tells you that that case might be to the end of its useful life, or you need to change the conditions of your load development. Now that's case head expansion. Okay, just in front of that there may be a ring that will form. This has to do with case stretching. Now all cases stretch. You know, the flow goes down as you fire, and the pressure goes down. That brass actually forms to, like I said, forms to the chamber. But it will grow, it will get longer, and then when it comes back to its elastive state where it started, it may be not all the way back, and that's where case stretching can come involved. Now, if you have that from after every load, then you either have a problem with your firearm or you're overloading your case. Now, this has to do, of course, with full-length resizing, but you measure that with a, not a micrometer, but, you know, any type of caliper will give you that measurement. Then you go back to the SAAMI specifications or your reloading manual, and it will give you the size of that case that it's supposed to be, and will recommend that you actually reduce it or trim it down even further than the specs so that you can fire it the next time without necessarily resizing. All right, so let's talk about that ring in front of the case head again. This is, if you see a ring there, you can take a paper clip or whatever and put it down into the mouth of the case on the inside of the case that you can't see, and take that paper clip and run it inside that case. If you feel any type of indentation in that case on the inside, like a scratching or kind of a catching deal, that's the start of incipient case head separation. That definitely means that case needs to be discarded. And I've had it on commercial ammunition after the first shot, which had me take that firearm down to a gunsmith to check for excessive headspace, because that sometimes can contribute to it. All right, ejector marks on the case head, I don't really go by that because I shoot a lot of semi-automatics, and that very, very violent action happens so fast that the case hasn't had a lot of time to cool down. I mean, it's extracting it and jacking the next case into the chamber for the next shot. Unlike a bolt action or a single action where that process is slowed down from your bolt lift to your ejection or you know, however you're going to get the case out of the breech, that allows that case to cool down even more. All right, so the last thing, and I've never had this happen on the first firing, but I've heard tell that it can happen, and that is a split in the case neck. All right, now that generally happens to hand loaders who are at the end maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, brass is brittle. It is, and it dries out and it gets hardened. And then through resizing or whatever, you're reworking or overworking the brass, and you can get a split in your case neck. Now, that requires you to look at that case after sizing and actually look at it to make sure that there is no split, because that is going to cause, you know, a catastrophic problem with your firearm. Okay, folks, well, that's a lot of talking today, but I wanted to go through the process that just because you're shooting and having fun, that does not mean that the inspection process or the understanding of how cartridges work for both internal ballistics and external ballistics work. So I hope you enjoyed this, folks. It needed to be said. If you did enjoy it, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment if you will, because I'm sure I left a lot of things out. But I wanted to kind of make it simple for everybody. But I'll see you next time. God bless y'all. Goodbye.